Now, what I want to do is I want to. It'll be better if we read the text, and then I want to ask you to tell me if and what interpretations you heard of this story before we actually dive in and talk about the interpretations of it. So we've come past the flood, we've finished with the Noahic covenant, and then we get this really interesting story, to say the least, of one of Noah's sons, Ham, doing something pretty bad. And the question is, what did he do, and what was the consequences of it? So we're going to read Genesis 9, starting in verse 18. We're going to read through verse 29 tonight. I think that finishes off chapter 9, just leaving the table of nations. Starting in verse 18, Genesis says, "The sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan." Now, right there from the beginning, he's introducing something, and then he immediately breaks his introduction to give us information. 3 sons and then a grandson. Does the name look familiar, Canaan? It should. It's a pretty important Old Testament location. Okay, so Ham...
saying that Ham is the forefather of the nation of Canaan, or the region of Canaan.
Through the table of nations in the next chapter, yes. But this is a precursor getting us to this. Okay, so Noah has 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These were the 3 sons of Noah, and from them came the people who scattered over the whole earth. Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard. When he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, in case it wasn't clear, saw his father naked and told his 2 brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulders. Then they walked backwards and covered their father's naked body. Their faces were turned the other way so they would not see their father naked. When Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan." Ham's son, I've added that in myself. "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers." He also said, "Praise be to Yahweh, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Shem. May God extend Japheth's territory. May Japheth live in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be the slave of Japheth." After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. Noah lived a total of 950 years, and then he died. Okay. Have you ever read this story before? And if so, what interpretations of it have you heard?
I have read it. I've never heard of an interpretation.
Okay.
I never found out why was it such a travesty.
Okay. That's okay. We're going to talk about that tonight. Jared, Steffo, any ever heard anything about it?
I don't remember there being any.
I've never heard it taught.
Okay. Even like up until like the 1960s, one interpretation was that the curse of Ham, and if you follow through with the Table of Nations, when you see not just Canaan, but the rest of Ham's descendants are in North Africa, one interpretation was that the curse of Ham was to have black skin. And that where it says Ham will be slave to Shem, may Canaan be slave to Japheth. By the way, Canaanites are Semitic people. They're not African people. So if they're being slaves to Japheth and Shem, it wouldn't be the black Africans used in the slave trade. But this interpretation was used. The curse of Ham was black skin, and Canaan's enslaved to Shem and Japheth, meaning it's the white Anglo people get to enslave the black people, and it's right there in the Bible. So that was one interpretation up until... It's some solid eisegesis they got going on there. And so that was a big one. The other interpretation that gets closer to the mark but still misses the mark is based off of verse 22. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked and told his two brothers outside. Does anybody looking at a translation that says anything other than saw his father naked? Okay, so this is the NIV, so you're probably reading the NIV. CSB says the same thing. Okay, so what we're going to talk about tonight is that is not a very good translation at all. That this idea of seeing your father naked isn't what the text is saying. It's a Hebrew idiom, and it has a very intentional meaning, and we're going to talk about that tonight to understand what this story is and why it's included in the Genesis narratives. So, before we get there, I want to highlight on one simple slide connections between the old and new creation, meaning in before the flood and after the flood, specifically Genesis 2 and 3, and now here in Genesis 9, the world has started over again. We've seen plenty of those ideas throughout the text thus far. They're continuing on here in this passage. For instance, in Genesis 2, God plants a garden. In Genesis 9, Noah plants a vineyard, a small portion of a garden. But it's the same picture. Adam and Eve eat the fruit of that garden, and Noah drank the wine of the garden. Once they've eaten the fruit, their eyes were opened, which I talked about meant their minds are changed. The actual Hebrew language is their eyes are open, and they knew they were naked. They knew they were arum is the Hebrew word. It's the same word that describes the serpent in Genesis 3:1. The serpent was more arum, shrewd, crafty, these ideas in 3:1, and that same Hebrew word gets tied to them in 3:7. Their eyes are open, and they knew they were, it gets translated naked because that's a part of it, but they were naked and exposed. They knew that they were less for eating the fruit, not more, which was what the serpent promised them. And so after eating the fruit, Noah, the fruit of his vine, he becomes drunk. Not unlike the craftiness of Adam and Eve after they've eaten it. So there's a connection there to their attitudes and their outlook. They saw that they were naked. Ham saw his father's nakedness. And yes, this is the right translation. We'll talk about why. They made themselves clothing. Shem and Japheth covered their nakedness, the nakedness of their father. We'll talk about what that means. God said, "Where are you?" And this idea of trying to hold Adam and Eve accountable. What have you done? Did you eat the fruit of the vine, the fruit that I commanded you not to eat? And in this one, Noah skips the questioning. He knows what his son has done. And we're going to talk about what exactly his son did. And then in 3:15, you get the promised seed of the woman. And what we're going to see as we come to the end of this chapter is that the seed motif reappears again through the bloodline of Shem here. So all of these are connecting this odd story that we don't know what to do with in our modern culture back to the pre-flood world, but also to the good and bad before sin enters in, before rebellion enters in. It's not all negative, but it's mostly negative. And this scene in Genesis 9 is mostly negative. It starts in these first two verses, 18 and 19, with an introductory shift to a new portion. And of course, the author goes out of his way to mention that Canaan is Ham's son. Why would he do that? Twice. He breaks his own introduction. Once upon a time, a guy had 3 sons, and he had a grandson. Don't forget about this grandson. Don't you skip that grandson. Are you skipping that? Are you threatening to skip that? I will come at you if you skip that grandson. It's like he's shoving it in our faces here as an author. Why does he do that? The story is designed to play this out. The story, the fact that it goes out of our way, the author goes out of his way twice to tell us that Canaan is Ham's son, should tell us something about how we're going to interpret Ham's actions. Before he even gets to it, twice the author does this. Noah, talking about more connections to the creation story, the language of this says Noah was a man of the soil. Soil is literally the Hebrew word Adamah, just as Adam was taken out of the Adamah, the ground. Noah is connected to the land. So you could translate this, Noah was a man of the land, a farmer, and he planted a garden, a vineyard. So by linking the word to Noah, he is being pictured as a new Adam in a new creation. He's a new gardener in a new garden. And I already mentioned this a little bit last week, talking about the covenant, that the language there made Noah like a new Adam, a new head of humanity. This here, in a new narrative mini story, short story, is doing the exact same thing. So the new gardener proceeds to plant a vineyard. So he plants a vineyard like God planted the garden. And note the passage of time. We don't know how many years have passed here. We don't know how long this is taking. But time is passing. The language proceeded could be translated as something a little more literally. Noah was the first to plant a vineyard. And I bring that up because the idea of him getting drunk, if the idea is supposed to be more strictly he was the first to plant a vineyard, maybe he didn't know what the fruit of the vine was going to cause him to do if he drank too much of it. I don't know if that's the case, but it's an interesting idea that is on some level worth grappling with. But not tonight, because we're going to grapple with other stuff. We're going to grapple with whatever the heck Ham is doing. He's got this sinful choice, and he's going to boast about it. Verse 22, Ham, the father of Canaan. So, he goes out of his way to make this connection between Ham and Canaan. Verse 22 in the NIV says he saw his father naked. This is not a good translation. This is a very misleading translation, and all of our translations in this room are using this translation, and they're all faulty. Of course, all English translations are faulty. Hebrew doesn't translate to English one-to-one. What happens is when they're translating this, they lose the Hebraic idiom here. So, here's the question. What is an idiom? Literary device. What is it? Tell me. Colloquialism. I mean, you're on the right track. Can you be a little more specific for this particular colloquial idea?
It's a phrase like a cat in your throat that everybody knows means like you've got a scratchy throat, but you don't literally have...
Okay, you've got a cat in your throat. Everybody knows you don't literally... You have a scratchy throat, you don't literally have a cat in your throat. Very good. So...
The French version, sorry.
The French version?
Frog in your throat.
Frog in your throat.
Yeah.
Cool. Either way you would use it, you're absolutely right. So all I had to do was Google idiom to get an official definition. An idiom is a common phrase or expression with a figurative meaning that cannot be understood by taking the individual words literally. Instead, the words work together to create a completely new, culturally understood meaning. So in France, a cat in your throat. In the New Orleans bayous is a frog in your throat. Out of the way, the people know what you're talking about, okay? Because they know it has absolutely nothing to do with, oh my gosh, you swallowed a whole frog? That's impressive. How did you do that? Man, if you think a cat's going to cough up fur balls, why didn't you cough up that entire cat? You know, but you understand when you hear it that it's a non-literal device. Other examples, let's paint the town red, means let's have a good time. It has nothing to do with painting. It has nothing to do with the color red. That topic is a hot potato. Could mean that something is controversial to discuss while having nothing to do with potatoes or the degree to which they are cooked. Unless, of course, your topic is the controversial details about what the proper degree at which to cook potatoes are. And so if you're involving a hobbit talking about potatoes, then you may actually use the phrase hot potato, which is a very different game, by the way, when the people are starving. Then it's more like my potato. But you get it. And it's important to understand idioms, because if you recognize your Hebraic idioms, everywhere in the Bible. They will explain to you, you're not supposed to be reading this idea literally. You're supposed to be reading the literary idea of the phrase and plug that into the historical context of the story. A lot of people get their Bible interpretations backwards because they over-literalize in one form or another. They're not recognizing the genre a book is written in, or not realizing the simple phrases in Hebrew that aren't supposed to be taken literally. So, what the text is doing when it says Ham saw his father naked in the NIV is that it's translating the idiom too literally, and we're reading that too literally. It accidentally removes the Hebraic idiom and the sexual euphemism that's inherent in the text. The euphemism being, they're trying to substitute the word or the phrase to sound less blunt, because Ham is going to do something very, very bad here, sexually. And so when the allusion of his father's nakedness should literally read, Ham saw his father's nakedness, not saw his father naked. That's the literal rendering of the euphemism. So what does the euphemistic idiom mean? What does it mean to see your father's nakedness? Does it literally mean you saw your father naked? Or does it mean something else? If we go to Leviticus 18, and Leviticus is a very useful book if you know how to use it, it has a couple of verses here. We'll look at 3 verses. 18, 7, and 8 says this, and I'm using the New American Standard Bible translation for this part because it's a much more literal and it doesn't do away with the idiom in its translation. So Leviticus 18:7 says, "You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father, comma, that is, comma, the nakedness of your mother. She is your mother. You are not to uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is your father's nakedness." So, right here, it is saying your father's nakedness is a way of describing his wife, your mother or stepmother. If you sleep with her, because that's what the euphemism is, it's not just about, oh, I saw my mom or stepmom naked. It's about, I slept with my stepmom or I slept with my mom. That's uncovering your father's nakedness. The euphemism is designed to say the sexual rights of your father to his wife are uncovered by you. You violated that relationship. So whether it's describing the nakedness of your mother or the nakedness of your father, it's about the sexual euphemism of sleeping with a married person. And referring to your father's nakedness as a way of suggesting that you slept with your father's wife. Here, whether it's your actual mother or your stepmother. Again, in Leviticus 20:11, the same thing gets brought up. If there is a man who sleeps with his father's wife, he has uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them must be put to death. They have brought their own deaths upon themselves. And here the assumption is she's as complicit in seducing her stepson as her stepson is in seducing his mother. But you see that language. Uncovering your father's nakedness refers to sleeping with your father's wife. The language of exposing someone's nakedness is not merely language for seeing someone naked, but of having sex with them. These verses in Leviticus use the same Hebraic idiomatic phrase of exposing your father's nakedness to describe sexual relations with your mother or stepmother. In light of that, it is justifiable to interpret the same phrase in Genesis 9:22 as Ham saw the nakedness of his father as meaning Ham saw his mother's nakedness, meaning a sexual sin is being referred to in polite euphemistic terms, so this can be read out in mixed company, which means Ham slept with Noah's wife, not Noah himself. One interpretation of this is that Ham found his father drunk and then basically raped his own father. because that not understanding the idiom or reading a translation that does away with the idiom, it's enough where people know, okay, there's some sexual sin here. He's boasting about his father's nakedness. Ham must have sodomized his father and then gone out and boast about it to his brothers. But that's not the Hebraic idiom. The Hebraic idiom is he slept with his mother, probably stepmother. And I say that because there's nothing explicit in the text to suggest that Noah's current wife is the mother of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. In fact, the language that it used has led rabbis for centuries, well before Jesus' day. Lots of rabbis suggested, not just in light of this story, but in light of the fact that the language is so odd. It goes out of the way to say Noah and his wife and his sons and their wives, but it never actually calls Noah's current wife in the flood narratives the mother of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, which seems odd. And so lots of people interpret that along with the story as saying the mother of Shem, Ham, and Japheth probably died and Noah got remarried by the time the flood came around. I think there's probably some reality to that, and that it's not an incestual thing going on here. But it could be. I have to say it could be, but I don't know that that's the most likely option. Yes, Jared?
Euphemisms and idioms like that change over the course of generations.
Yeah.
What's the time of writing from Genesis to Leviticus?
Well, okay. That's a good question. Yeah, and that's a good question. Between this part, now I will make the argument that the Genesis prologue 1 through 11 could not have been written in the form that we have it before the exile. But I think Leviticus is probably much earlier than that, going at least in some form all the way back to Moses on some level and the institution of the tabernacle and the cultic system there, which would have been about 1,000 years roughly between them. I'm just ballparking here, not trying to be exact. I will say, because of the ancient world's communication style, their euphemisms and languages and stuff didn't change near as fast as us who don't understand what Gen Z is talking about at all these days with the skibbity toilets and all that stuff. Like, every generation these days comes up with its own slang and its own idioms and stuff, and its own shorthands for everything. In the ancient world, you passed it along your entire lifetime, so your grandkids knew the same idioms you did. Was more proper. I would say there's probably about 1,000-year distance, but I would also suggest that during the exile, or shortly after the exile from Babylon, in the 6th century BC, that Genesis through Deuteronomy shows clear signs of going through updating redactionary things that scholars have noted about the text. Deuteronomy is a big one, much more so than Leviticus, because Deuteronomy has places where an earlier form of it called a town this word, and then in your English Bibles, if you read it in parentheses, it'll say, which is now called this or something, because by the time of the exile, it changed names, and so they needed their audience to know what the location is. And instead of just changing it in the text, they just added to the text in a later generation, and that's a part of the inspiration of how we got the final forms. I would guess a good 1,000 years of time has passed between like Moses and the Genesis prologue of this story being written. But this particular idiom was so common throughout not just Hebrew but other Semitic cultures that uncovering someone's nakedness was still the most common, well, not the most, but a very common euphemistic way of saying, I slept with so-and-so. You call your buddies up and say, yo, I uncovered so-and-so's nakedness. What's up? Because that's what Ham is doing here when he comes out of Noah's tent and boasts to his brothers. So the question is, does this phrase demand Ham slept with his mother or his stepmother? If it was by itself, it might not be the case. Technically, even as a euphemism, it could mean that he only saw his mother's nakedness and boast about it to his brothers. Is it trying to say that he saw but didn't actually do anything? But there's a very obvious, clear point to this that brings out why he actually did something sexually here with this woman. We've already seen and been given information multiple times that puts these sentences in the context that the author wants us to see them in. What is it? Ham was the father of Canaan. Why did the author go out of his way to tell us that Ham had a kid named Canaan? And not even mention that Ham, who's got his own wife because she was on the boat. Why would it go out of its way to tell us this? Because the story is about what Ham does with Noah's wife and birthing Cain through her. That's the point of the story. In a moment of Noah's drunken weakness, Ham sees the opportunity to try to exalt himself above his brothers by dominating his father's wife, either his own mother or possibly their stepmother, and birthing a son through her to secure greater power and inheritance. Now, that's a loaded sentence.
Canaan is Noah's wife still.
Yes, I would think so. Now, there's a few obvious things here. How do you go from sleeping with Noah's wife to and birthing a son through her to getting greater power and inheritance? How is this trying to exalt himself above his brothers? If you follow the interpretation and you're already freaked out enough, like Steve Harvey on a Family Feud game, being an obscure answer, how do you go from, okay, he did something terribly, terribly wrong, possibly against this woman's will? It is entirely possible that he did rape this woman. We do not know, and it doesn't tell us. But it does tell us that Canaan is the child that resulted from Ham's sexual action. How does that get to Ham trying to secure power for himself, trying to secure a greater inheritance and stuff? So we need to acknowledge two things about the ancient Near Eastern culture that would have been assumed by the original readers: the firstborn rights of inheritance and the common practice of sleeping with the previous patriarch's woman or women to establish oneself as the new man in charge. These two things together would have been obvious to any ancient reader of saying, oh, well, of course Ham tried that. He went through the woman to try and pull one over on his brothers and usurp his father's position. So let's talk about these two things. The firstborn rights of inheritance. An ancient Near Eastern patriarchal culture had their system of inheritance. Normally, the firstborn son of any family would receive a double portion of their father's inheritance for the purpose of becoming the next patriarch of the family. For example, a man with two sons splits the inheritance three ways. The firstborn gets 2/3 of the inheritance. The other son only gets 1/3. So, excluding Kara, because now from this, let's use your kids as an example, because you have two sons. I didn't even think about it when I was writing. Actually, when I wrote this 3 years ago, at least 3 years ago, on this was back in Texas, so I wasn't considering this. But you would take your inheritance and divide it up between Luke and Sam, and you would give Luke 2/3, 66%, and Sam would get 33%. Now, in the Hebrew system under the law, women could inherit. That wasn't a problem. But mostly their inheritance is gained through their husband via marriage. So most of the inheritance went to the boys to split up so that they could share it with their wives, and wives get in on it by marrying their husbands. There is a story in Deuteronomy. Zelophehad has only daughters, and they come to Moses and they say, he didn't have any sons. He died. Do we get to inherit? And Moses says, yes, absolutely. This is not to go outside of your family. This is precisely for your family. So the women got it. So this is not excluding women, but it predominantly went through the males here. And this is how your sons would break it up. So, for instance, Jacob has 12 sons and one daughter. So he would, excluding his daughter, because we don't know when she got married off, but she seems to at some point be married because she's no longer a part of the story after a certain point. So we're assuming that she just went and lived with her husband, regardless of where she is in relation to her father and his household now. So he has 12 sons, so he would break up his inheritance 13 ways. Keep that in mind because we're going to come back to Jacob as an example here. Now the extra portion, the extra third in our example, would be used so that he could benefit the entire extended family. It was not to be squandered on himself alone. It was not to say, well, you're the oldest, I'll just give you more. It had a cultural purpose. You must defend, lead the entire extended family, protect them, all your brothers, all your sisters, all their families. If you're going to be the patriarch and you're going to receive the inheritance here, it must serve a purpose. The purpose is the protection and defense and survival of the entire extended family that man is patriarch over. He would then pass this responsibility along generation to generation through his firstborn. Any questions on that thus far? All right. So in Noah's particular instance here, he has 3 sons, so he would split the inheritance 4 ways. Verse 24 tells us that Ham was Noah's youngest son. A little later on, it's going to tell us that Japheth was actually the oldest. Therefore, Shem was the middle child. So Ham would be the last in line to get the double portion because he's the youngest. Japheth, it would be assumed, naturally, would be first in line. He gets first dibs. He's the oldest. He's had the longest time to train with his fathers about what it means to lead the family, to take care and preserve the life of everybody in your extended family. And these families are going to grow quickly, and they're going to live for a long time. But Ham is like, nope, I don't want to be last. I don't want a pitiful inheritance. How do I become next in line to lead all of humanity here for the sake of the story? Well, he can't get it because he's the firstborn. So his other option is sleeping with the previous patriarch's woman, or sometimes women. It was a common thing amongst rulers, and especially kings, to keep a harem. If you were defeated in battle or died, your harem went to your successors. Your harems were called concubines, women you were not married to, but you had a legally binding contract with so that other men could sleep with them, and you could. A harem is just the fullest expression of concubines. So, to come back to Jacob, Jacob has 2 wives. He's tricked into marrying Leah when he wants to marry Rachel, because his father-in-law is more of a thief than Jacob is towards his own brother Esau. So he's tricked into marrying the older daughter, Leah. Then he gets to marry Rachel. So he has 2 wives. They're having it out because Rachel can't have kids. So she says, sleep with my concubine. Make her your concubine, and I'll have children through her. And then Leah's trying to keep up. So he says, I'll give you a concubine, and we'll have more kids this way to grow our family. Because Leah isn't really loved by Jacob. And so they're competing for Jacob's love. Rachel, who is loved by Jacob, can't have children for the longest time. Just to bring this up now, because it's a good time while we're talking about Jacob. All of Jacob's sons, let's just think in order. Reuben is Jacob's firstborn son. But do you know which of Jacob's sons gets the rights of the firstborn? It's actually kind of a unique case in multiple ways. Yes, Joseph. Joseph gets the rights of the firstborn, which is why his grandsons become the 2 tribes of Joseph. You get talk about in the Old Testament the tribe of Joseph. You get the tribe of Manasseh and tribe of Ephraim. Ephraim, the youngest, because Jacob crosses his hands, actually gets blessed as to being the firstborn of Joseph. He's going to be the stronger of Joseph's 2 tribes. Every one of Jacob's sons, starting with Reuben, all the way down through his 10th son, because Joseph is his 11th, and I don't remember which order was the 10th. disqualify themselves from being the firstborn inheritor, and it starts with Reuben. So Joseph gets special treatment for two reasons. One, he's the actual son through Rachel, whom Jacob loved, but also because the rest of the sons are just unworthy. They do things throughout the Genesis narratives that disqualify them. But what makes it interesting is that although you would expect if Joseph is going to be the lead tribe of the tribes, it's actually Judah who gets to retain leadership. The scepter will not depart from Judah, even though he's the fourth-born son. Joseph somehow gets to be the firstborn and gets to be the mightiest of all the tribes, but Judah, in a very real sense, is the saving grace. God's election of who gets the rights of the firstborn in all of this has nothing to do with birth order. He is constantly choosing the second sons in the Genesis narratives. As we will see, he chooses Shem, not Japheth, to carry on the bloodline. Well, Ham's third, and so he's like, I'm not doing this. I want to be great. And so he's going to pursue greatness by sleeping with his father's woman. Sleeping with the woman of the previous king was a sign publicly that you're taking his power for yourself. It was like it's very animalistic. It's like marking your territory. So you took another man's kingdom. If he had a harem, it was the easiest way to inform everybody that you are now the man in charge over the kingdom. His harem is mine means his kingdom is mine. And there are examples in the Bible of this. We've already talked about this one. Genesis 35, 22, and 23. Reuben sleeps with his father's concubine Bilhah. He thinks because I'm the firstborn, I don't want to wait for my father to die. I want to start being man of the house now. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to show my father's concubine who's boss. And that will make me leader of this community now. And ironically, his father says, nope, and you are not going to be my heir anymore. So he loses his rights as firstborn by doing this. So yes, you could lose the rights of the firstborn. Jacob steals them, tricks Esau, takes advantage of Esau, and says, Esau, you should give up your firstborn to me and I'll give you some soup. But Esau fails to actually take the inheritance responsibility seriously. So he's like, fine, whatever, just give me some soup. I don't care. And then when it's too late and he can't get his blessings back, he gets really upset with Jacob, understandably so, but it's a whole thing. So in the book of Samuel, when David is given the kingdom of Saul, he takes Saul's concubines for himself. David's weakness is women. He has lots of wives and even more concubines. Speaking of David's concubines, when his son Absalom rebels against David, overthrows David, and drives David out of... Well, David leaves Jerusalem before Absalom could really drive him out. But David intentionally leaves 10 concubines behind. Absalom pitches a tent in the roof of the palace area, and just one by one sleeps with all 10 of the concubines in that tent where everybody can see it and knows what he's doing. He is telecasting to everybody in Israel, I'm in charge now, my father's not even here, and look what I'm doing to mark my territory. And the thing about being a concubine in the ancient world, it wasn't necessarily a negative thing. It could be, but David left the 10 concubines that he picked because he trusted them, and said, I think you can handle this. Do what you can to actually frustrate Absalom, and I know one day I'll be back. Now, whether or not he ever got to actually sleep with them again, because sleeping with somebody that your father or your son has slept with in the law is prohibited. David wasn't really short of women that he could sleep with, Bathsheba or otherwise, but you can get the picture here. And then if we go a generation later into the book of Kings, when Solomon takes the throne, as David is dying, let me back up. As David is dying, the opening narratives of 1 Kings, and in the first couple of chapters, he can't get warm. And so his counselors say, okay, well, let's get him a woman. David loves women. A woman who's never been touched by a man. They find the Shulamite virgin, and they say, go lay with the king whenever he gets cold. And the text goes out of his way to tell us that David didn't sleep with her, because they know David's weakness is women. It's trying to tell us, man, David just does not physically have it in him anymore to sleep with women. He's too old, he's too decrepit, his life is fading away. So this Shulamite woman was there to sleep with David, but David couldn't consummate the actual relationship. So when David dies and Solomon takes the throne, Adonijah tries to take the throne for himself, and Solomon's mom Bathsheba has to get together with David's counselors and say, wait a second, David said Solomon was going to be king. Adonijah's declaring himself king. We're going to have civil war here if we don't do something. So before David dies, they hatch this scheme, go in and say, David, you got to do something. You got to declare Solomon king. David says, you're absolutely right. That's what I said I was going to do. It's past time that I did it. Go get my donkey, put Solomon on it, and parade him through the streets while Adonijah's at this private party. David's doing this publicly for Solomon. Adonijah's at this private party declaring himself king with a bunch of his people. So everybody turns to Solomon as king, and Solomon says, look, I'll let Adonijah live so long as he doesn't make a play for the throne. But the second he makes a play for the throne, he's dead. And that's the only thing he promises his brother, half-brother. So what does Adonijah do? He tries to go through Solomon's mom Bathsheba and say, hey, can I get the Shulamite woman that the last woman our father was with, can I make her my wife? He's not in love with her. He doesn't care. He's trying to establish dominance in the kingdom by saying, I want the last woman our father was with to be my woman now. Solomon correctly understands the trick, the play, and he has his half-brother killed because he's trying to make a play for the throne. Which brings us back to the point of this story in Genesis 9. Ham seizes the opportunity in a moment of his father's drunken weakness to try to exalt himself over his brothers by dominating his father's wife and birthing a son through her to secure greater power and inheritance. Is anything about that unclear or not make sense? Or any other questions you want to ask?
Why did he make it a point, say that the other brothers covered up Noah? You know what I'm saying? Like, after that happened, why was it important to tell us that the other brothers went ahead and covered him up without looking?
Because, one, okay, so do you remember when we talked about Lamech in Genesis, 4 or 5? There, Cain's the seventh descendant of Adam through Cain. Lamech is boasting to his wives, I killed a man for insulting me, and if you insult me, I'll do the same to you. If Cain is avenged 7 times, Lamech 77. Ham is doing the very same thing. He's boasting about it to his brothers. Guys, you're not going to believe this. I'm in charge now because I just totally banged our stepmom. What's up? What's up? It's that kind of tone. He is proud of the fact that he did this. And so the juxtaposition is that Shem and Japheth are as respectful to their father by covering up their stepmom or their mother. I don't know which one she is. They're not going to look, Ham is deliberately doing this. They're deliberately trying to do what they can to comfort their mother, honor their father, without shaming anyone else in their family. What Ham has deliberately shamed himself, their mother or stepmother, and their father. It's an insult to him, and they're doing everything as politely and respectfully as they can.